And hello, my friends. It's Captain Billy the Terror Clown here. No, sorry, that's not it. Tad. It's Tad. Tad. Writer. That's right. Just had to check there for a moment. I had a momentary lapse of sanity and self awareness, but I'm back. I'm here. I know what's going on, more or less. And I am here to read to you, among other things. Not a lot to report tonight, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking. I should mention that although I don't always see all the questions and stuff, I do like it when there are questions and there are things that I can answer. But that does not mean anybody has to do it. I'm not asking for people to do it. You know me, I'll talk whether there's anything to talk about or not, and I always have reading to do, which I will be doing in just a few short minutes. News, not much news. Rain, terrified dog. Other than that, nothing exciting going on here, particularly working away on a fiction problem for the end of Ordinary Farm 3. This is not like the last one that I told you about where I just sort of stepped way back and went, okay, what if I totally throw this whole idea out and try something different? And that was the clue, because this is one of those things where the whole book has set up this bit of the thing, but there's still some questions I have. So I've spent literally most of today and most of yesterday just trying to come up with a solution here. And I realize it's not really a solution so much as it may be a kill your darlings moment. Most of you who have ever heard me or who have heard other writers have heard us talk about the kill your darlings thing. This was a comment, I believe, originally in the 1920s by William Faulkner, the famous American writer, at his Nobel Prize for Literature ceremony. Yes, that's a cat back there. That's PJ. The orange cat. Anyway, William Faulkner said that one of the things that a writer had to learn how to do was to kill his or her darlings. This is not in any way advocating the murder of one's family or friends, honest to goodness. No, what he meant is that sometimes a writer, or probably any kind of artist or crafts person, you get fixed on an idea. It may even be the idea that started the whole process. It's very important. You love it. It's exciting, or it's a great twist, or whatever it might be. And then sometimes you get to a point in what you're working on where you realize, actually, that's just making everything really, really difficult. And that's what Faulkner was talking about. At a time like that, you have to be willing to kill your darling. And so that's the one I'm contemplating at the moment. It's not, I don't have to just back far enough away from the project to get some perspective, which is what I had to do in the last one. This is more like there's this thing I really want to have happen, and I have to figure out if I can make it happen without it being, first of all, a bit of hat on a hat, if you know that old phrase, a hat on a hat, which is another way of saying over egging the pudding, as we used to say in the UK when I lived there, and I have continued to say since. And or gilding the lily. That's another one. I'm working with stuff where I'm going like, is this too much of a good thing? Is this going to take away from the dramatic energy of this, that, and the other thing? So that's what I've been working on the last 2 days. It probably has looked to my family like I was actually comatose, or at least extremely lazy, because I spent several hours lying on my back with my earbuds in trying to figure it out yesterday, and then did the same today. Haven't really gotten anywhere close to it yet, but I think I have some ideas, so I'll be sloshing a few more things around. This, however, is the time when it's very frustrating to have a thing like this happen, because the ending of a project is so close you can smell it. It's just like, I just have to get this last little bit knocked off, and then there's like another one or two chapters which are sort of downhill and tying things up, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's doubly frustrating at those times to have to wait because you don't have it right yet. Because, any writer worth her or his salt could basically write pages. You know, I mean, if that's all you're trying to do is just get pages written, you can do it. You can make scenes out of nothing. Every now and then they turn out good and you go, oh, I'm going to keep that. But most of the time they come out the way that you would expect, which is they're mediocre or they're, you know, kind of shortcuts or whatever. They're not the real thing. So what I learned a long time ago is at times like that, just don't write it because you're just going to have to get rid of it or you're going to have to massively change it anyway. Just think. Just walk around being a stranger to your family until such a time as you get it solved, and then everything will fall into place. And in my life and what I humorously like to refer to as my career, that's worked for me. So I continue to do that. Now, instead of dwelling on what I humorously think of as my career, which at this point in my life as a working writer seems to be mostly somebody who is pops up on the internet as like books that everyone has forgotten. And if I'm lucky, it's good books that everyone has forgotten. I decided a long time ago that I really did not want to go the whole hog on making a career out of self-promotion. It's why I didn't do anything on the internet until the pandemic started, at which point I started reading these things. I mean, in terms of like broadcasts and putting my face on here, you can understand maybe why I wasn't in any hurry to do that. It's not all that exciting a face. But it just became clear to me really early on that the people who were going to make it were either making it, not make it. I mean, I've made it. I've made a living doing what I love doing, so no complaints there. But I mean, the people who like get to that next level somehow are the people who are hustlers in a way that maybe I'm not, and I don't use that in a derogatory sense. I don't begrudge anybody for being a better self-promoter than I am, because that's part of the game. And the fact is, I'm a pretty good self-promoter, as I always have been. You know, when I do interviews or whatever, I do a pretty decent job, and I do book tours, and people usually walk away at least, you know, they seem to be happy. They seem to have been pleased they came out to see me and things like that. So it's not that I'm a failure as a self-promoter. It's just that I have never wanted to put all my time and energy into it outside of my writing. First of all, because my writing takes a lot of my energy, but also just because I had a family. Still do. Can't get rid of them. But I have a family still. And I always did since 1997. And that became a very important part of my life, and wanting to be a dad and a husband and be around. So I've kind of turned some things down over the years. I haven't gone to that many conventions. I haven't done all the things. I've never started doing the kind of stuff online that I probably should have been doing a few years ago. And I don't, excuse me, I don't regret that. Let me get something to drink here. I don't regret that at all. But there are times, as I said, when I see myself referred to as as one of the forgotten writers of the modern age in fantasy and science fiction, where I go like, maybe I should have gone to a few more conventions or things like that. Anyway, I'm going to see who's showed up and who has checked in and who has left a... All right. Who is here? Again, I can see nothing. I see one comment and a lot of names. So, Petra. Hello, Petra. Good to see you. Wouter. A pleasure, as always. Suzanne. Hello, Suzanne. Dirk. Christina. And Maria Henschke. Or Henschke. Anamika. Hello. Isaac. As always. Good to see you. Rosalba. Kristen. Ivan Ivanovich, my friend Ivan. Hello, Ivan. Pleasure as always. Chris, person who puts these up on YouTube for me. Thank you, Chris, as always. Christy Sanders, Sandra, Kay, Penny, Carol, Nicole, Mark, Nikki, and Nikki. Oh, I owe Nikki an apology. Oops, and I just lost whoever else there was on there. Nikki, just to mention to you, I didn't see your friend request until after I had filled the last slot that came up a couple days ago. If I had known, I would have put you on it because I see your name here all the time, and I know you're checking in with us and all that stuff. And I would very much like to friend you, so I will try to remember the next time I have an opening to jump you in the line, because presence, showing up is 90%, as everybody says, and they're right. And your presence here is always appreciated, so I will manage to get that done if I remember, which is always questionable because, of course, my brain is old now and very, very tired. And but generally, I do okay. All right, hang on. Let me just move this down and move this up. I'm just making some changes here to my screen so I don't accidentally get rid of something that I probably needed. Okay, and we can even put that up a little higher. Excuse me for doing all this in public. It's kind of gross and weird, but there you go. And why is that there? I don't want that there. Anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's something that no one can see but me, I hope, I think. Maybe I better go back and check. Anyway, so as I said, I am going to get started reading tonight fairly early. I don't have a huge amount to report. As I said, I think I've told you everything that's going on. Life here, normal. Hope your lives are normal if normal is good. And, I think that's certainly something to be appreciated. Oh, and there's other friends. Hello, Jay. Good to see you. Good morning. And Stephen Watson, hello. Good morning to you, too. A real pleasure. You can see the top of my head. Oh, damn it, that did show up. What is that? Not that the top of my head is something I'm trying to hide or anything, but what is that? And why did it happen? And why is it there? Well, let's just move it out of the way for now. All right. I don't know why that happened. I'm still trying to figure out my equipment here. Anyway, okay, so that sort of pink beach ball thing at the edge of the screen there should have moved by now. If it hasn't, let me know. Oh my God, we do have fun in a sort of a sick way. Okay, anyway, so what I am going to do, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to talk about. Not really. There's just, it's just work. As you can see, the basement of Hideous Doom and Confusion is still hideously doomed and confusing. I am in the process of dealing with all the other stuff that we have to do before we can clear the basement out. And eventually I will have a lovely background of some kind to share with you. For now, you can just keep your eyes open for the cats that wander in and out occasionally. And yeah, that's it. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for putting up with my blather. And I will get to reading. So where we were last time, and when we were reading, oh yeah, that's right. We had a scene where Pasiphalis was being seduced by Idela, who is the dowager princess, in the sense that her husband, John Josua, who were Simon and Miriamel's only child, their son, had died 7 years ago, I think, or something like that, but not before having two kids. And Idela is the survivor, the widow, and she was in the process of trying to seduce Pasiphalis, who is the Lord Chancellor and who has lots of involvement in this plot, but so far we've seen what we've seen of him, and he allowed himself to be seduced. And that was the last bit that we read. So we are now doing a different section where we are going back to check in on Prince Morgan, and Prince Morgan, of course, the grandson of Miriamel and Simon. And Morgan and Count Aelair have been sent on a mission to the city. And Morgan has been allowed to take along one friend, not the one he would have chosen, because it's Sir Porto, who is an older gentleman. And all four of the trolls who have been visiting with Simon and Miriamel, this is Binabik and his wife Siski and their daughter Kina and her betrothed, little Snenek, are all traveling with him. So this is a whole group that is set off from the Hayholt. They are going north and east to try to find the Scythi, with whom the the mortals, the humans, the whatever, the non-Scythi have not been in contact for many years. And it's very worrisome because of current events and the need to resume contact. So that's what's going on. The first night, they camped within sight of Aldhart Forest. As Binnabic and the trolls were caring for the Sitha, oh, yes, that's right. For those of you who don't remember, the other person they're taking with them is Tanahaya, who was apparently, or perhaps, a Scythi envoy to the Hayholt, the first one in decades, and who was almost killed in an ambush. Nobody knows how or why or by whom. Well, they know how. She was shot full of arrows, and they were poisoned, and she has been struggling for life for weeks, and now they're going to take her back to the Scythi in the hopes that the Scythi can help her, if they can find the Scythi. So that's where we are. The first night they camped within sight of Aldhart Forest. As Binnabic and the trolls were caring for the Sitha, Count Eolair waited until the knights and their squires began eating their suppers, then asked Morgan if he would like to accompany him into the forest. "But why?" said Morgan, who had been about to go in search of Porto and the wineskin the old man generally had somewhere close by. "To blow the horn, Highness," said Eolair, patting the wooden box tied to his saddle. "There seemed no sense in doing it while we were still within the bounds of Irchestershire." Morgan could only say yes. He found his horse cropping contentedly in the thick green grass and climbed into the saddle. The mare gave him such a look that he almost felt he should apologize. "We're not far from Hasuf Vale," Eolair said as they headed their mounts toward the dark edges of the forest. "It was a dark place once. Your grandparents were captured there, nearly killed by fire dancers, worshippers of the Storm King." "I know all about the fire dancers," said Morgan. "Believe me, Count, I have heard all the stories." He was missing his sister and his grandmother and didn't much want to talk. He even missed his mother. Morgan had a sudden memory of his grandfather drolly suggesting that the women in the family were conspiring to keep the king and his grandson from having any proper fun. His grandfather had wanted to go out and catch frogs in the Royal Puddle, which was his joking name for a large pond at the edge of the castle's common green. Morgan hadn't been particularly interested in catching frogs. Already he was concerned to appear a young man, not a small boy. But he had been pleased his grandfather wanted to spend time with him. When had that been? After his father's death, certainly. As he thought of it now, he remembered more than a few occasions when the king had tried to interest him or amuse him. "You and I, Morgan. That's what it'll come down to. You mark your grandfather's words," the king had said. "They'll never let you do anything if you listen to them. Your mother and my wife. They're afraid you'll be hurt, but what's wrong with a bloody nose from time to time?" Then he had told some story about Rachel, a chambermaid who had apparently frightened him badly when he was young. His grandfather had been kind to him in those days. It was true. Why had everything changed since then? Why was the king always so angry at him now over a few foolish scrapes and mistakes? You've gone quiet, Highness," Eolair said, startling Morgan a little. "Is all well?" Yes, he said, although his thoughts were so confused and uncomfortable that he truly did feel unwell. "I'm just tired of talking." So they rode silently through the trees, spotted with failing afternoon light, Eolair in front and Morgan just behind him, grateful that the older man respected his wish for silence. The sun was low in the west, but such sky as Morgan could see between the branches was orange and red, except for high above their heads where it showed somber blue. In the new quiet, he could hear the sounds of the forest, or, in this case, the absence of sounds. But for a few birds piping far away, safely distant, Morgan heard nothing but the soft crunching of twigs and leaves beneath their horses' hooves. The camp was only a short ride behind them, but it suddenly seemed leagues away. "Ah, I think we can tie our mounts here," said Eolair at last. He dismounted, still impressively nimble for a man his age, and knotted his horse's reins around the slender trunk of a birch, then began to remove from his saddle the box that held the horn. Morgan tied his horse beside Eolaire's, staring around at the shadowy glade. It's so quiet. Even to Morgan's own ears, that sounded like a foolish thing to say, but Eolaire only nodded. The forest is careful, the Count replied. It does not welcome visitors, but it does not repel them either. At least that is what my father used to say, although he was talking about our own Grensbog woods. This forest, the Old Heart, though. Many say it is the oldest place there is. That is why it is named Old Heart. How could one place be older than another? Morgan demanded, unsettled by his recollections and by the forest stillness. Eolaire had taken the velvet sack out of the box and now slid the cloth from the horn as carefully as if the strange instrument were a sleeping child. Morgan said, I mean to say, if God made the world, then he didn't make a forest first, then the rest of everything later on, did he? That doesn't make sense. The sound of his voice in the quiet clearing seemed harsh as a hectoring crow's. No, you are right. Eolaire held the horn up to admire it in the dying daylight. And I would be the first one to agree that we need more sense in this world. Morgan had never seen the horn before, although it had been mentioned in many stories about Sir Camarus and the Storm King's war. He was surprised to discover that it disturbed him, although he could not have said precisely why. In some ways it seemed crude, just a curving cone incised with small, precise carvings, a silver mouthpiece, and simple silver decorations around the wide end, its only ornaments. But something about it held Morgan's eye, made his heart slow and then speed again. That's it, he said. That's the horn of Great Camarus, like in the songs? It was, but I think he was not the first to wind it, not by centuries. Do you see these marks? The Count drew his finger along the carvings. These were made by the Scythi, and not recently, or so I have been told. This horn was crafted when the Scythi still ruled Ostenard. Are you going to blow it? Morgan asked. Of course. Or at least I am going to try. Try? The horn is like other great and powerful things, Highness, not always easy for us to understand. When Prince Josua brought it to Sir Camarus, who had lost his wits, the old man seemed at first not to recognize it. Then, suddenly, Camarus took it up and blew loudly and clearly. After that great blast, his mind became clear again. Why should that have been? You can ask the Scythi when we meet them, if we meet them, because I doubt anyone else could say. Then, may I try? To sound the horn? Of course, Highness. Eolaire lifted the hem of his cloak and rubbed the mouthpiece until it shined. Morgan took the horn. It was surprisingly heavy, not like something made of bone or antler at all, but more like stone. He lifted it to his lips and then lowered it, feeling the hush of the woods press in upon him. If they hear it, the Scythi, they'll come? No one can know, Eolaire told him. But if they do hear it, I doubt they'll ignore it. Not something like Tatuno. Morgan lifted it to his mouth, steadying it with his other hand. He pursed his lips and blew, but nothing came out but a sputter of air. I didn't think it would work, he said. Try again, said Eolaire, and for once an adult's urging did not feel like an order or a scolding. Think of the Scythi. They have lived here since long before mortal men walked this land. Think of them and their deep forests, listening. Despite having seen the Scytha woman on her sickbed and having heard many stories of the old days, it was hard for Morgan to imagine the fair ones. Old stories kept creeping in, stories he had heard from older children and from servants in which the pale-haired Scythi were more like ghosts than men. He closed his eyes and tried to think of the wounded Scytha's cat-like eyes, which had opened once when he had gone to see her, blazing golden against her bloodless features, startling him badly. He tried to imagine eyes like that here in the forest, perhaps watching the prince and the old count this very moment, golden eyes staring from the shadows. This time the horn gave out more spit than air, but still did not sound. "I can't do it," he said, and held the horn out to Eolair. "If you can't, I doubt I can either, Highness. Not with these weary lungs of mine." The count shook his head. "If the horn has something of the Scythi's making in it, your claim is at least as great as mine. It passed from Chimeras to your grandparents. Try once more." It was strange for Morgan to think of having any claim on such a thing, especially by the mere accident of birth into the royal family. But of course that was why he was expected to be king someday, was it not? By the accident of his birth? By the accident of surviving his father? The thought made him feel empty. He lifted the horn to his lips and blew mightily, blew until his cheeks ached, but no sound came. "Once more, then we will return," said Eolair. "If we cannot make it sound, still we can find other ways to announce our presence. There's no shame. Please, Highness, just try once more." Morgan wanted to argue, because he knew that there was shame in failure. As someone who knew he had been sent to these dark, empty woods simply because he had been caught breaking rules, he knew that as well as anyone. But here, in the ancient forest, it suddenly seemed like something that had happened far away and long ago. He felt the weight of the horn in his hand, the substance of it, and looked at the last gleam of the setting sun, burning between the trunks like a distant fire. "Snenek's knucklebones said that I won't get what I expect," he suddenly remembered. "What will I do then if I don't become king?" A strange anger filled him, not the sort that scalded his heart when he didn't get his way, but another sort of feeling, a deeper rage at blind, foolish fate. But why, he wondered, why does it have to be that way? Why does anything have to be that way just because others say that it is? Without even realizing, he lifted the horn to his lips, holding it with both hands like an upended wine goblet. But instead of letting the fiery taste of happiness run down his throat and fill it up, this time it was his job to do the filling, to fill this heavy thing with his own breath, to bring it to life. What if this is the only important thing I ever do? And as he thought this, Morgan for the first time felt the famous horn as something more than an ancient artifact, a piece of lost history. He closed his eyes, and the twilit forest vanished. There was only Morgan and Tituno then. For an instant he thought he could feel what the horn's creator had felt, the nameless Scytha who had long ago carved the runes and polished the curving surface until it gleamed. In that instant he could even sense how the horn's triumphant music was not summoned from somewhere else, but crouched inside it like a dragon hiding in a cavern, all that fiery power coiled, but awake and waiting. Somehow, even if only for the space of these few heartbeats, the horn became part of him, and he, not just the air inside him, became part of the horn as well. He blew. This time he heard something immediately, a rattle that became a groan. His lungs and the horn became one thing, a passage of fire from his body into the horn, and then out into the silent forest. A single note that grew from a moan to a stuttering howl to a deeply sounding roar, like the bellow of a huge beast. The sound climbed into the air of the forest clearing and hung there for so long that Morgan almost forgot it was he who was making it. Then it fell away, leaving only faint echoes. Despite having been the one to urge him to try one last time, Count Eolair looked surprised, almost stunned. "You did it, Highness. You did it, Highness," he said in a voice so soft it was almost a reverent whisper. His heart pounding with exultation, Morgan winded the horn once more, as much to feel the sensation as anything else. Tituno's call rolled out through the darkening woods, deep and throaty and astonishingly loud, the cry of some creature God had made and then forgotten. But the Scythe did not come. Morgan still felt a sense of triumph, but though he blew 2 more times, nothing answered the blasts but echoes. The prince and the count got back on their horses and returned through the forest, through an evening now alive with cricket song, back to the cook fires and the company of other mortal men. Chapter 43. Into Deeper Shadows. "Why are you here, mortal?" demanded the half-blood slave, looking her full in the face. "Here in the storerooms we heard no mention of your coming." His lack of courtesy was both insulting and infuriating, but Soja did not dare let herself be goaded into making a scene. Just the proper amount of anger was what she needed, no more, no less. The Hikedaya were highly sensitive to precedence and position. "How dare you speak so to me, you low creature?" She hoped her features showed the cold fury she felt, but not her even stronger fear. "Do you not see my household sigil? Mortal or not, I am an important concubine of the High Magister of Builders, Lord Vieki himself. I gave him a child who, despite being a half-blood like yourself, is an honored member of the Order of Sacrifice, a queen's talon, no less." Her inquisitor flinched just the tiniest bit, an infinitesimal tightening of his skin as if anticipating a blow, something Soja would never have noticed before living in Nakiga. Now, she knew, it meant that her gambit had succeeded, at least in part. "I beg your indulgence, mistress," he said in a more guarded tone, "but I have been told that certain low-born creatures have been making free with the Queen's pantry. I am only doing what I am bound to do." "Mistaking me for a slave even lower than yourself, you mean?" Soja now felt herself on familiar ground again, since she had faced this sort of thing on many more legitimate errands. She made a sign with her fist against her throat that meant, "I will swallow my righteous fury for the moment." "Still," she said, "since I work hard, as you do, to protect that which belongs to the great mother of all, and to preserve the memory of the lost garden, I will not mention you to my lord, if you quickly comply with my wishes. I need enough food for a few days' journey." The slave, who could not have been much older than Soja herself, but whose Norn blood, as it did for her own daughter Nezaru, gave him the look of a much more ancient creature, made a strong gesture of apology. "Again, I ask for your mercy, mistress, but why do you need such a quantity? Your master's clan household has already had its allotment." Starvation had been a familiar companion to the Hikedaya in the years after the War of Return's failure. This menial had doubtless been harshly schooled in taking his guardian's role seriously. "Fool of a slave!" she said, making her face as disapproving as she could. "Do you think yourself a temple priest, teaching an ignorant child to recite the prayer for the queen's strength? Or is the mortal blood in you so powerful that it stupefies the rest? Where is it written in the Hamaka dictates that you may ask questions of a high magister's concubine? Do you demand the details of what my husband and master wishes to do with the food as well? If so, I think the queen's teeth might take an interest in your interest." The blow was well aimed. The slave's face crumpled in poorly hidden fear. "No, mistress, please do not misunderstand me. Usually we are informed of any such need ahead of time. My husband has recently left on a mission given to him by our great queen herself. He left me detailed instructions on what I was to do during his absence. You say you were not informed, but I wonder if it is possible instead that you have lost his orders?" She paused for effect. "Again, I offer to call for the queen's teeth, or even the nearest guards, and we will quickly find a straight path through this crooked passage." Surrender. "No, please, mistress, I am certain the fault was ours." The slave had the deep black eyes of his Norn blood, but the sallowness of his skin had been lightened by fear until he was almost as white as a pure-blooded Hikedaya. "Make yourself free and do what you must." He turned to where several of the less bold kitchen slaves cowered in the background. "We all pray for your husband's safe return." "And the triumphant fulfillment of the queen's wishes, of course," Soja said. "Oh, of course, mistress." It was secretly satisfying to make rude half-bloods like this one swallow their own words, but Soja knew that at this point someone in her position should either walk away from this undignified discussion or call the guards so that such argumentative slaves could be punished. But there might still be some small advantage she could exploit that would fall within the bounds of accepted behavior. "I am too angry now to look for myself. Here is what I have written down of my husband's orders." She held out the page on which she had made her list. "Bring me these things." Of course, mistress," said the slave. His now downcast eyes promised that there would be no further questions. "But none of us can read." "Then I will read them to you, and you will make haste to find them all." It was a long walk back from the Order's storehouse to House Nduya, Magister Vieki's clan compound. Soja had to pass several dangerous points, including the rear gate of the Order House of Echoes, the Queen's trusted communicants, and it felt like an even longer and more perilous journey because she was forced to walk slowly, carrying the two heavy sacks. She thought she must look a bit like old Longbeard, the blue-hooded figure of Rimmersgard legend, who brought gifts of food on Midwinter's Eve. Longbeard, though, rode a great gray horse. Soja had to bear her burdens alone, carried only by her own aching legs. Another month from now, and she would have been able to choose from many nicer things to eat, but spring and summer came late and stayed only briefly in the Norn Fells, so most of what she had taken from the kitchens was the same sort of provender on which they had been living since the previous autumn. Hard-baked bread, equally hard cheese, and of course a great deal of the dried fungus called winter bread, which the Norns prepared in dozens of different ways, although Soja had not found one yet that she truly liked. As she trudged along, bowed beneath the weight of the sacks, it was hard not to reminisce over the food of her childhood. Hot stews, berries ripe from the vine, bread so light that even the oldest of her neighbors could chew it, despite having lost their teeth. It was one way that she would never be a Norn, no matter how long she lived under Stoney's storm spike. She hesitated when she reached a crossing, 6 different featureless tunnels that came together like a crooked star. It was easy at any time to get lost in the great stone hive that was Nakiga, with no sky overhead to orient herself. But what made it worse now was that she was not, despite her lie to the kitchen slaves, engaged in any kind of lawful activity. She was a resident of House Nduya, and could legitimately take food only from its great kitchens, which of course she dared not do, at least not in large quantities, because word would quickly make its way back to her master's wife, Kimabu, the ruling lady of the clan household. Soja would be in even greater danger if it was discovered she had been to the Order of Builders' storerooms, of course, but Soja was counting on the terror of making a wrongful accusation against a noble to keep the slaves quiet until she had finished her preparations and could flee Vieki's house. Because if she didn't, she knew that Kimabu would have her killed. She had all but taunted Soja with it at their last meeting. It was always hard to find her way through the deep darknesses of Nakiga, even inside her own household. Even after so many years living within the mountain, her eyes had not become accustomed to the way the Norns lived, to the tiny flickering oil lamps that lit most of the passages, especially away from the main thoroughfares, but which barely gave enough light for a mortal to see her hand before her face. Often Soja snuck into her husband's private garden just to stand for a moment in sunshine, however far it might have fallen from its original source and how many reflective surfaces may have redirected and diminished it along its way. After so many years here under the mountain, Soja had come to hate the darkness, hate it like a living enemy. After a moment's fearful consideration at the six-way crossing, she chose the passage that seemed most familiar, knowing that if she picked the wrong one, she might end up somewhere she didn't belong, carrying bags of stolen food. Beloved concubine of a powerful man or not, she would immediately be imprisoned, which would be as good as a death sentence, since Kimabu could reach her anywhere in Nakiga. That was why Soja had spent the last days preparing her escape to a hiding place that Kimabu would not know, a place that nobody but Vieki himself would think to look for her. And, if the gods were willing, tonight she would take the rest of the goods and clothing she had so carefully obtained and hide herself there until her beloved returned. To her relief, she saw she had chosen the correct corridor. The passageway led her to the wide and busy Avenue of the Fallen, which ran behind many of the great houses whose estates fronted on Great Garden Passage. Several times she passed other travelers who looked curiously at a mortal woman staggering under the burden of two enormous sacks, but each time Soja did her best to take on the bent, long-suffering attitude of a mere slave, and here, for once, her mortal shape and features helped her. Since the end of the Storm King's War and its terrible losses for the Hikedaya, the nobility had begun using mortals for many tasks that had once been done only by their own kind. Also, as with Soja herself, the nobles had discovered that mortal women were fertile in a way their own wives and concubines were not. Leaders like Magister Vieki had worked hard to overturn some of the oldest taboos, to permit not just the legitimate birth of half-blood children, who in the past had nearly always been executed along with their mortal mothers, who in the past had nearly always been executed along with their mortal mothers, but to broaden their acceptance in places that had always been barred to them. Even so, the rise of Vieki's own daughter Nezaru to the exalted role of Queen's Talon, especially at so young an age, had astonished many in Nakiga, not least of whom had been Soja herself. At last she reached the deep-word gate of House Nduya, the back door of the clan's residence. It was guarded, of course, but she had prepared this ground earlier and felt more confident than she had in the royal kitchens. "Greetings, Queensman Daigo," she told one of the guards as she set down her sacks. "I return, as I promised." Daigo, a sullen fellow that she had cheered a few times in the past with gifts of food she had saved for him, looked her up and down. "Hiya, Mistress Soja," he said. "You return. And I have brought you something." She reached into the bag and brought out a stone jar sealed with wax. "Cloudberries, kept under cold water all winter. Take them to your servant and have her make something nice for you." Cloudberries were picked in late summer and were a delicacy even when they were plentiful. At this point in the circle of seasons, during Otter's moon, when the new berries were not yet ripe, they were like jewels. The other guard, whom Soja recognized but did not know, made a face. A gift for Daigo, but none for me? Soja blessed the fortunate star that had warned her this might happen. What a surprise, Queensman! I have some for you, too. As she handed the jar to him, he gave her a look that was a bit less grateful than she would have expected, which made her skin tighten. Had she done something to make them suspicious? Did you see anything interesting while you were out, mistress? The second guard asked. They say that Lord Akinabi himself was seen on the glinting passage. She hid a shudder. Very few living things in Nakiga frightened her more than the master of the Order of Song. The noises that echoed at night from his great mansion were heard by many, but spoken of by none. No, she said to change the subject. That honor was not mine, but several men from the Order of Sacrifice threatened and insulted me when I passed them. They called me a bricklayer's bitch. Bricklayer? Daigo was frowning, but not, she suspected, at the idea of a sacrifice calling her someone's bitch. That's what they said? Bricklayer? I paid little mind, she said. Now, forgive me, but I must get back to our apartments and continue my preparations. She had told Daigo something earlier about preparing a meal for Kimabu. But if I truly did, she thought, I would make sure that the cloudberries and everything else were poisoned. Daigo and his fellow guard were already arguing over which sacrifices might have been insulting the Order of Builders, and in which soldiers' tavern along the glinting passage they might be found later. She hoped she had not done it with her improvised tale. A fight between orders that drew the attention of the Queen's teeth would do her own plans no good whatsoever. But there was no doubt that between the supposed jibes from the Order of Sacrifice and the gift of cloudberries, the guards were well and truly distracted. She bowed to them both, although they hardly noticed, then shouldered her sacks again. Pause for just a moment. Okay. And, oops, where's my book? There we are. None of the servants she passed on her way through the clan house seemed to pay much attention to her. She made it all the way to her own door without being challenged. But as she set her sacks down to withdraw the orichalcum key hanging on its chain around her neck, she saw that the door was already open. Soja's blood seemed to turn ice cold in her veins. She had not left the door so. She would never have left it so, and she specifically remembered locking it and then checking it again before she set out. Her heart beat so loudly she doubted she would hear anything else, but she leaned close to the door anyway, listening. Male voices, quiet but forceful. More than one, and they were inside her room. If she had been innocent, she might have walked in and demanded to know who they were, but carrying 2 heavy sacks full of contraband foodstuffs, she did not dare. The voices grew louder. They were coming out. Soja looked desperately from side to side. The sunken doorway of an unused apartment was a dozen steps away. The door would be locked, but the doorway would be deep enough to hide her when the strangers came out, as long as they turned back toward the main hallways. If they didn't, well, no point in thinking about that, or she would lose her strength and fall down right here before her own door. She clutched her bags and huddled as far back in the doorway as she could, holding her breath as the searchers stepped out into the corridor. She could make out only a little of what they were saying, but thought she heard one of them say, "She will be unhappy," and her heart slammed in her breast. Kimabu. Had her beloved's wife sent someone to kill her? To her relief, the men turned in the other direction, and their voices grew quieter. Summoning her courage, she leaned cautiously out from the doorway and looked toward the two men just before they disappeared around the corner of the passage. White. Their armor was white, and on their heads they wore the sharply peaked helmets that proclaimed them Queen's teeth. What could the Queen's own guard want with her? Oh, great God, she thought. Viecki warned me that the Queen wanted to send all mortal concubines back to the slave compounds. Have her guards come for me then? Or is it something worse? She remembered her secret cabinet and the things hidden there, things that would mean her death if someone saw them. She had secured them as well as she could, but had thought she only had to hide them from the servants. Oh, merciful halls of heaven, have they found my hiding place? But even that terror faded into insignificance when she realized that she was no longer safe even in her master Viecki's house. The Queen's teeth might return any time, and then the most fortunate thing that could happen to her was that she would be returned to the slave compounds, to be raped by any noble with a taste for mortal flesh, no matter how powerful and official her beloved might be. More likely, Kimabu would simply arrange for her to be killed, because Viecki was gone. The time for planning and preparing was gone, too. Soja needed to flee for her life. Next section. The horses could go no farther up the increasingly treacherous slopes, and Mako, so we're back with Soja, her daughter, Soja's daughter. We're back with Nezuru, who is Soja's daughter, and Mako is the leader of their group. Sorry, I confused you, so I'm trying to unconfuse you. So this is the Norn Talon on a mission to Ermsheim, being led by Jarnolf the Mortal, who is posing as a Queen's huntsman. The horses could go no farther up the increasingly treacherous slopes, and Mako declared they were to be left behind before the Talons climbed any farther. So they found a cave with a freshet of water from some source deeper in the mountain. The entrance was slippery with ice where the water trickled out, but inside the cave was dry. Nezuru found the blocks of pressed fodder at the bottom of the saddlebags, and, with the mortal Jarnolf's help, crumbled a dozen of them in a corner at the back of the cave for the horses. Saumeji built a fire near the opening, and Keme and Mako, who were both still weak from their injuries, settled next to it. "We will warm ourselves for an hour, Singer," Mako declared, "but after that, we must climb again." "I beg you to reconsider, Chieftain," said Saumeji. "We need to rest longer. Look, Keme's wound is bleeding again. We may have dealt with the Skaliar, but there are other creatures in these mountains, not least the dragon, dragons we actually seek, who know the smell of blood." "Also," said Jarnolf, scattering the last of the fodder, "some of us cannot climb so well in darkness. In any case, I doubt we need to keep hiding our presence by climbing only in darkness. The giant said he cannot smell any trace of the bandits or any other two-legged enemies." "Do not seek to instruct me, mortal," the chieftain said. "You two," Saumeji gestured at Nezuru and Jarnolf, "go and find us something to eat. A night of full bellies will do us all much good in the morning." Mako pushed himself up to a sitting position, his face almost as hard as Queen Utuku's silver mask. "Do you give the orders here now, Singer?" "My apologies, Hand Chieftain. Of course not." Mako stared at Saumeji for a long moment, then turned to Jarnolf. "You and the Blackbird go out. Be useful, as the Singer suggested. I am tired of looking at your faces." "Bring back meat," said Keme. "We are not Zidaya to live on flowers and bees' milk." Jarnolf turned and walked out of the cavern, splashing through the water that spread into a tiny cataract at the cave's mouth. Nezuru followed him. Why did Mako keep throwing them together? Did he hope to entice her into some treacherous alliance with the mortal? Gogamgar was sitting just outside the cavern, his thick yellowed pelt his only protection from the bitingly cold winds.
"If you two are going out to rut,"
the giant said pleasantly to Nezaru,
"you had better dig a hole in the snow. It will serve you for a nest, too, should you bear offspring. Still, they will be thin-blooded, mostly mortal whelps. With such a father, I doubt they will survive. But perhaps it is only the rut itself you seek, a sacrifice."
Nezaru stepped around him, mindful as always of the giant's long, powerful arms. "Silence, monster," she said, but she could feel a burning in her cheeks and was sure her half-mortal skin betrayed her. "You lie to sow distrust. You accuse others of what you want for yourself." The giant laughed, and the icicles shivered above the cavern entrance.
"Oh, fear not. You are safe enough from me. Gogamgar would split you like a skinned rabbit on too large a stick."
She set her jaw and marched away. Jarnolf was waiting a dozen paces ahead, gazing out across the uneven peaks and the deep valleys, all covered in snow. "Such helpful traveling companions," was all he said. "We are fortunate." Nezaru thought it would be a good idea to go back down the mountain, to places where they had seen stands of evergreens which might hide game, but Jarnolf only shook his head. "And what if we kill something large? I do not think much of having to carry it back up the mountain to the cave. No, we should go upward. We will scout a little of tomorrow's journey, and if we find anything to shoot, we can drag it back down, instead of bowing our backs." So they clambered up, trying to find the best footing they could, but not always succeeding. Once Jarnolf stepped into snow that gave way beneath him. He disappeared into a crevice so quickly he did not even have time to cry out. For a brief instant Nezaru thought him lost, but when she clambered as close as she dared to where the crust had given way, she found that he had only slipped down a few feet below the surface. She slid her pack out until he could grab it by the strap. After much slipping and sawing, he at last managed to scramble out of the hole. "My thanks," he said, and once more displayed the expression she could not imagine from any Hikedaya, a broad grin. That might have been unpleasant. How did the giant sense my complicated feelings about this mortal? Nezaru wondered. Not that it is lust I feel, as the beast suggested. Nothing so obvious, but I must be more careful around the others. At last she and Jarnolf reached a flat stone plateau at the edge of a scarp. It fell away so severely that Nezaru could see no bottom to it, only an increasingly muddled view of shadows on snow. The rest of the plateau stood on the other side of the abyss, some 36 paces away across empty space. Movement on the far side of the drop caught Nezaru's attention. She held her hand out to stop Jarnolf when he came up behind her, then made the signal for silence when he started to speak. She had spotted a huge mountain goat standing on the farther plateau. "Nezaru," her companion said, slightly louder this time, but she signaled him even more violently to be quiet. In what seemed one smooth gesture, she flicked her bow from over her shoulder, raised it, knocked an arrow, and released. The shaft flew across the chasm like a beam of light and struck the goat in its side. The animal took a stumbling step, then slumped down onto the edge of the plateau, its head dangling over nothingness. It tried to lift itself a few times, as if to die on its feet, but the arrow had gone too deep, and within moments it had gone still. "I admire your eye and your aim," said Jarnolf as he looked at the dead mountain goat, its long hair set aflutter by the stiff wind. "You are not the only one who can hit a target," she said. "Yes, but neither of us has wings. How do you propose we retrieve it?" She bit back an angry response when she realized he was right. The two sides of the plateau did not join, so there was no way across the chasm to retrieve her prize. For a moment, Nezeru felt almost as if she might weep, like a mortal, like her own mother, great useless tears of humiliation. "I am a fool," she said at last. Between the earlier jibes of the giant and her own reaction, she had failed to make certain they could get to the other side before she shot. "There is always more to killing than simply killing," said Jarnolf as he stared out across the gulf. And that's where we're going to stop, because the chapter goes on and 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 goes on for quite a while. So we are going to stop right there. And at this point, I am going to check back in here, see if we've got anybody else I haven't said hello to. I think pretty much everybody. Stephen Watson. I don't think I said hello to Stephen Watson. So hello, Stephen. Janice. No, I said hello to Janice, I believe, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so good to see you all. Thank you for joining me tonight. I enjoyed your company. And I hope you, if you didn't enjoy mine, I hope it didn't at least ruin your evening or morning, wherever you may happen to be. And I think that's basically all. I'll be back at 7 p.m. tonight for those who can manage the time zones. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your friends and loved ones and anybody else that you can find time to help out, because the more that we pay it forward, the better world we're making in front of us. And whether we see it ourselves or the generations after us see it, that don't really matter, because humanity is a team effort, for lack of a better term. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for joining me. I think I already said that, but it never hurts to say it again. And that's pretty much it. I will see those of you who return at 7 p.m. Otherwise, I'll be back next week, as far as I know. Don't know any reason why I wouldn't. Same time, same TAD channel. Peace out and be good to yourselves. Ciao.